an ordinary day. In the evening, while returning home, Alex discovered a strange letter in his mailbox. It had no return address or signature, just a white envelope with his name on it. The envelope was made of unusually thick paper, slightly coarse to the touch, and it featured a barely noticeable emblem, something resembling intertwined lines forming a symbol that Alex couldn't decipher. At first he thought it might be a mistake or a joke, but inside was a letter, written in neat, almost calligraphic handwriting, with a detailed description of events that were supposed to happen in 3 days. The ink was dark blue, and the text looked as if it were written by hand, adding even more mystery to the letter. It mentioned a meeting with a friend he hadn't seen in a long time, a minor incident at work, and a phone call from someone he hadn't heard from in years. Alex used to live a calm, measured life. He worked in an office, met with friends on weekends, and spent evenings reading or watching movies. His life was quite predictable, and that suited him. But occasionally, Alex felt that something was missing. He sensed a certain emptiness, but didn't know what could change his existence. Alex smirked. Someone clearly decided to play a joke on me, he thought, trying to explain it all rationally. He considered that it might be a mistake, or perhaps someone was trying to prank him. Maybe it was some kind of marketing gimmick. Alex went through several possibilities, but none seemed plausible. He even tried to remember if any of his acquaintances could pull off such a prank, but no one fit the profile. He decided not to dwell on it and threw the letter in the trash, paying it no further attention, although a slight sense of unease lingered deep inside him. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, Alex thought, trying to distract himself, but the doubts crept in deeper than he expected. 3 days later, everything happened exactly as predicted. The meeting with a friend, the incident at work, and the unexpected call. Alex didn't know how to react. This is just a coincidence, he kept repeating to himself. He tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence. Perhaps his memory was playing tricks on him. He even tried to recall if he might have heard something similar before and simply forgotten, but everything matched down to the smallest details, causing chills to run down his spine. Could this really be possible, he wondered, feeling a growing sense of unease. He tried to distract himself with work and everyday tasks, but thoughts of the letter wouldn't leave him. Alex repeatedly tried to convince himself it was a coincidence, but all the details matched too precisely. He remembered the letter he had thrown away and, for the first time, wondered, what if it wasn't just someone's joke? Maybe there's something more behind it? Alex tried to convince himself he was imagining things, but the sense of anxiety grew with each passing day. He started doubting his previous conclusions, and now every sound, every glance seemed to hint at something hidden. What if I'm just going crazy? Crossed his mind. But it brought him no relief, only heightened his internal anxiety. Inside, a vague sense of worry and curiosity arose. If it's not a coincidence, who or what is behind it? A few days later, a new letter arrived. Alex couldn't believe his eyes. It was just like the previous one. Thick paper, the same neat handwriting, and the mysterious emblem that now gave Alex a strange sense of familiarity. He tried to convince himself it was a prank, but a feeling of anxiety grew. This time, he decided not to throw the letter away immediately and read it carefully. This letter described even more serious events. A pending misunderstanding with his boss, a minor accident on the way home, and an argument with his girlfriend. Alex knew he needed to do everything possible to avoid these events. He decided to discuss his fears with his girlfriend, have an honest conversation about his apprehensions. The conversation turned out to be difficult but profound. Alex opened up to her, sharing his fears and feelings, which was unusual for him. His girlfriend saw his vulnerability for the first time, and it strengthened their relationship. She listened attentively without interrupting, and then gently said, "Alex, I don't know what I would do in your place, but I want you to know I'm always here. You're not alone." These words touched the depths of his soul. She realized that he truly trusted her, and it brought them closer. After the conversation, they started sharing their thoughts and feelings more often, and their bond grew deeper and stronger. Despite all attempts to avoid the predicted events, they unfolded exactly as foretold. Alex began to realize that the letters had some power that controlled his life according to a predetermined script. But he also understood that this power wasn't absolute. Much depended on his own attitude. This realization filled him with a mix of fear, anger, and helplessness. But it also hinted at the possibility of change if he altered his approach. He didn't know where they came from or who wrote them. But he understood one thing. The predictions came true. Sometimes he felt sarcasm towards fate, as if it were a game in which he was destined to lose. But in moments of silence, hope awoke in his heart that he might find a way to change everything. With every new detail he saw unfolding before his eyes, Alex felt control slipping from his grasp. At times he felt anger, wanting to challenge these letters, and sometimes a sarcastic smile as if fate relished its power over him. Inside him, a whirlwind of thoughts raged. Why me? Why can't I change this? However, Alex gradually began to realize that fighting only intensified his helplessness, while acceptance allowed him to rethink the situation. Sometimes, in rare moments of calm, he felt a quiet confidence that perhaps, if he stopped fighting, he could find another way to cope with this. At times, he simply wanted to give up, to let go and stop resisting. "It's pointless," he repeated to himself, feeling small and powerless against an incomprehensible force. But even in these darkest moments, Alex still sought a way out, clinging to the tiny hope that something could be changed. Alex began keeping a journal, recording each letter and the subsequent events. He tried to analyze what might be causing this mystical intervention. He even turned to an old friend who was interested in the occult, hoping to find an explanation. But all the searches were fruitless. Meanwhile, the letters kept coming. A week later, another letter arrived predicting a tragedy. His best friend Jake was supposed to be involved in a serious accident. Alex decided that this time, no matter what, he would prevent it. He met with Jake and convinced him not to drive that day. Instead, they spent the evening together, playing board games and having heartfelt conversations. Laughing, Jake said, "You know, Alex, I can't remember the last time we had such a calm evening. We're always rushing somewhere." Alex smiled in response, feeling warmth spread inside him. It had been a long time since Alex felt such a close connection with his friend. They spent the evening discussing life and old memories. At some point, Jake added, "You've changed. You've become more calm, haven't you? You used to always try to control everything." These words made Alex reflect, and he realized how much he missed such communication and how important these moments were for his inner balance. He was sure he had succeeded, that he was able to change the future. But as Jake walked home, A drunk driver drove onto the sidewalk and hit him. When the car struck Jake, Alex stood in shock as if time had frozen around him. His body was paralyzed with horror. How? I did everything right. I prevented this. Thoughts raced in his head, but reality was relentless. Rage surged over him like a wave. He clenched his fists, feeling his anger choke off his breath. Why? Alex wanted to scream, but couldn't. Despair rose in his chest. He looked at the street where the tragedy occurred and, for the first time, felt that his struggle was in vain. At that moment, everything collapsed. He no longer knew what to hold on to, what to do. The letters weren't warnings. They were a verdict. Over time, the letters increasingly frightened him, leading to depression and alienation from those around him. He even tried to burn one of the letters, but a new one appeared in its place, as if nothing could stop this process. When the letter disappeared in the flames, the smell of burnt ink and paper lingered, and a few days later he would find a new envelope with the same symbol and familiar handwriting. His life turned into a nightmare. Every morning he woke up wondering what new ordeal awaited him. When the next letter arrived, Alex opened it with trembling hands. He feared finding out what more fate had in store for him. By the time Alex finished reading, his hands were trembling. He could no longer hold the paper. It felt like it was burning him with realization. He dropped the letter on the table and covered his face with his hands. My family. The word echoed in his consciousness. Fear gripped his chest so tightly it seemed like his heart would stop beating. He wanted to run, to protect. But how? Each day he lost more control, and this knowledge tore him apart inside. I can't. I am powerless. A cry echoed inside his mind. It felt like an invisible force was pushing him to the edge of an abyss where he had to accept his fate or fall into despair. At times he felt acceptance, almost a fatalistic acceptance of the events. But then protest awoke in him again, a desire to at least try to find a way out. This sense of complete helplessness weighed on him like a heavy burden. Alex felt he had nothing left to counter this invisible force. For the first time in his life, he felt an overwhelming urge to just give up and accept the inevitable, to rid himself of this endless inner tension. Alex decided he needed to find out who was behind the letters. At some point, fear gave way to rage, and he installed surveillance cameras around his house, trying to track couriers and mail carriers, but no one brought these letters. They simply appeared, laid in the mailbox or under the door, always at the same time, as if delivered by invisible hands. This ultimately shattered his belief in the reality of what was happening. He felt helpless, like a puppet in the hands of an invisible puppeteer. He began to wonder who might be interested in controlling his life. Alex started to recall his past. Were there moments when he hurt someone, did something wrong, but nothing came to mind? He even began to suspect it might be part of some experiment. Perhaps someone was observing him, testing how he would react to the situation. But there was no evidence. On the day described in the letter, Alex took every possible precaution. He isolated himself at home, turned off his phone, and even the lights. But the more he tried to protect himself and his loved ones, the more he felt that events were unfolding in an inevitable direction. Eventually, his mother, who lived in another city, ended up in the hospital. Everything happened just as it was written. Alex realized that fighting it was pointless. The letters described not just a possible future, but his inevitable fate. Alex began to think about why he was the target of these letters. He recalled his past, his mistakes, trying to find some connection, some meaning in all of it. He even tried to consult a psychologist, but they just attributed his worries to stress and suggested medication. Alex knew the problem was deeper than just stress, but he didn't know how to deal with it. Alex opened another letter. His hands no longer trembled, but inside there was still a storm. He felt a mix of emotions, anger, fear, despair. But at that moment, something changed. He even felt a strange calmness, as if he had finally accepted the challenge fate was throwing at him. He realized that maybe it was not about fighting, but about being able to live with what couldn't be changed. He thought, if I can't change these events, then I can change how I face them. It was a revelation, bringing with it a slight sense of freedom. He looked at the lines written in the same calligraphic handwriting and felt the internal struggle gradually subside. Was there some special meaning in this, or was fate just playing with him? A thought appeared deep inside. Maybe it's not about fighting, but about acceptance. And yet for the first time in a long time, he felt a quiet relief, as if somewhere far away a light started to glimmer. Alex knew that he would no longer run. He decided that now he would live, knowing that each letter was part of his journey, which he would accept no matter what. Accepting the inevitable, Alex started to act more consciously, preparing for all the predicted events and facing them with confidence. Over time, Alex noticed that the letters began to change. He realized that their influence on his life depended on his own perception. At first, the changes were small instead of tragedies. The letters described minor incidents that provoked not fear, but rather mild surprise. For example, one letter predicted that Alex would find an old photograph which would make him smile, or that he'd have a pleasant conversation with a colleague. Gradually, these letters started to bring more significant positive events. Alex began to understand that the letters were a catalyst for his transformation. They made him reflect on his attitude towards what was happening and how he reacted to life. He understood that fate was not a set of unchangeable events, but rather a reflection of his perception and inner state. The letters no longer predicted tragedies. Instead, they began to describe neutral or even positive events, suggesting that his internal changes were affecting what was occurring externally. He realized that destiny was not always unequivocally positive or negative events. Their perception depends on him. The more he embraced his fate, the more he found in the letters a reflection of his inner changes and awareness. The letters did not just predict the future, but served as a tool for his growth. They helped him learn to perceive events differently, with openness and acceptance. The letters came less often, but each one held something important, giving Alex deeper insight into his own life. He began to understand that each letter was an opportunity not to change the event itself, but to change his attitude toward it. And this was his true freedom. One letter predicted an unexpected meeting with someone who turned out to be a valuable ally at work. These small joys began to transform into significant events that were changing his life. Alex started to notice that even the small things predicted in the letters began to bring him joy and filled his days with meaning. He realized he wasn't controlling the events themselves anymore, but his response to them. Perhaps fate had given him a chance, or maybe he himself had changed his future by changing his view of what was happening. But now he knew one thing. No matter what happens, he would no longer be afraid. He accepted his fate and was ready to face it, whatever it might be. The latest letters described small joys, a successful day at work, a pleasant meeting with a friend, an unexpected gift. Alex began to see in these letters not just messages from fate, but tools that changed him. He realized that their content reflected how he perceived the world with acceptance and gratitude. The letters became a mirror for him in which he saw his own changes, and this realization gave him confidence. He understood that destiny was not something fixed, but a path that could be traveled with different emotions and attitudes. Now he opened the letters without fear. They no longer contained threats, only interest. Alex realized that the letters reflected not just events, but his personal changes and perception of life. He felt that the letters no longer had power over him, and instead of terror, they now evoked only curiosity. What new challenge had fate prepared for him? And how would he be able to respond to this challenge? And when one day a letter predicted an important event, Alex did not try to avoid it. He put on his best suit and stepped out to meet his fate, knowing that, regardless of how circumstances unfolded, he could handle it. Alex realized that his strength was not in avoiding the future, but in accepting it and living each moment consciously. He no longer felt like a puppet in the hands of fate. Now he was part of this dance and, perhaps, even leading it himself. An important event predicted in the letter turned out to be an interview for a position that Alex had long dreamed of but never dared to apply for. He left home with confidence and readiness to accept any outcome. During the interview, he felt that he was no longer afraid of making mistakes. He saw them as part of his journey. His calmness and confidence made an impression, and Alex got the job. For the first time, he realized that his future depended on his choices and acceptance, not his fear of the unknown. The letters no longer seemed threatening to him. Now they were symbols of change and growth. Alex realized that the important event was not just a new job, but his new attitude towards life. Now he decided how to react to challenges and joys, and this was true freedom. The last letter he received was short. It read, "You are ready. But this is only the beginning. Ahead of you awaits something that you cannot even imagine." Alex felt a surge of energy and realized that his journey was not over. Something new and mysterious awaited him. And even though he didn't know what it was, he was ready. There would be challenges and joys ahead, and how he faced them would define his life. He was no longer afraid because he knew that every event was an opportunity for growth. Now he was in control of his life and embraced new challenges with an open heart.